I'm Franklin. Welcome to Florida, where the humidity is high and the morality is low. Florida in the late 50s isn't just a state. It's a kingdom of humidity and heritage. Here, the old money doesn't just talk. It whispers in the rustle of Spanish moss and the clink of ice against silver stirrup cups. In Palm Beach, the sun shines so brightly it blinds you to the rot beneath the manicured lawns. These families, the descendants of the great plantations, didn't lose the Civil War. They just moved the battlefield into the boardrooms and the halls of the Republican elite. They swapped their cotton fields for sugarcane and intelligence networks, but the whip stayed the same. It just became invisible. Cass Thorne adjusted the collar of his linen suit, feeling the sweat prickle against his neck the moment he stepped off the puddle jumper in West Palm. A former FBI man who had seen too much of Hoover's laundry, Cass now made his living navigating the jagged reefs of high society. He was a discreet investigator, which meant he was paid to find things that the police were paid to ignore. His destination, the Cypress Estate, a sprawling, white-columned fortress owned by Judge Beauregard Sterling. The Sterlings were Florida royalty, patrons of the party, owners of half the Everglades, and keepers of secrets that dated back to the Reconstruction. The drive up the long, oak-lined driveway was like traveling back 100 years. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming magnolias and the damp, sulphurous breath of the swamp that loomed just beyond the estate's iron gates. "The judge is expecting you in the solarium, Mr. Thorne," a butler said, his voice as dry as parchment. He led Cass through hallways filled with oil paintings of stern men in Confederate gray and women in hoop skirts, their painted eyes following every step. The solarium was a cage of glass and iron, overlooking a private canal where a lone alligator basked on a stone ledge. Judge Sterling sat in a wicker chair, his hair a shock of white, his face a roadmap of Southern pride and hidden agendas. Beside him sat a man in a sharp, modern charcoal suit, Senator Vance, a rising star in Washington and the judge's son-in-law. "Thorne!" the judge barked, not rising. "My granddaughter, Evelyn, has been missing for 48 hours. The local sheriff says she's just sowing her wild oats in Miami. I say the sheriff is a fool who wants to keep his job." "Evelyn isn't the type to run, Mr. Thorne," Senator Vance added, his voice smooth as silk but cold as a refrigerated morgue. "She's the heiress to the Sterling Trust. More importantly, she was assisting her grandfather with some sensitive archival work." Cass leaned against a marble pillar. "Archival work? In my experience, girls Evelyn's age usually assist with cocktails and debutante balls, not archives." The judge's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just family history, son. This is about the stability of the Caribbean. We have interests in Cuba, investments that require certain historical continuities to be maintained. Evelyn found something in the old plantation ledgers, something that didn't match the official narrative of the Janus Group's involvement in our local politics." Cass felt a familiar chill. The Janus Group. They were like a ghost in the machine, appearing wherever power and secrecy intersected. "She left a note?" Cass asked. "No note," the judge replied, gripping the silver head of his cane. "But her room was searched, not by a thief, by a professional. They were looking for a specific ledger, the one from 1864 that connects the Sterling shipping lines to the current stability contracts in Havana." The senator stepped closer, his shadow falling over Cass. "Find her, Thorne. Find her and the book. The deep state in this part of the country doesn't use telegrams. They use the swamp. And the swamp doesn't give back what it takes unless you know where to dig." As Cass walked back to his car, he noticed a black sedan parked in the shade of a weeping willow near the gate. Two men in fedoras and dark glasses sat inside, their eyes fixed on the house. They didn't look like family friends. They looked like the kind of cleanup crew the government sends when the old traditions start to leak into the modern world. Cass looked toward the dark, tangled tree line of the Everglades. The magnolias smelled like a funeral, and the humidity felt like a wet hand over his mouth. The Sterlings were playing a game that started before the telegraph, and Evelyn had just stumbled onto the scorecard. He started the engine. In Florida, the shadows don't just hide secrets, they grow them. And Cass Thorne was about to find out just how deep the roots went. In the South, history isn't a book you close. It's a basement you live on top of. The Sterlings didn't just build an estate. They built a monument to an era that refused to die. Every floorboard in the Cypress estate seemed to groan with the weight of things unsaid, and the air inside was so thick with the smell of floor wax and old power that you could almost taste the rot. Cass Thorne didn't believe in ghosts, but as he stood in Evelyn Sterling's bedroom, he felt like he was being watched by a century of dead aristocrats. The room was a study in controlled elegance. Canopy bed, French lace, and a vanity set with silver-backed brushes. But someone had violated this sanctuary. The silk wallpaper near the desk was slightly torn, and the books on the shelf had been moved with a military precision that didn't belong in a debutante's suite. Cass moved to the bookshelf. He wasn't looking for a diary. He was looking for the dissonance. He found it in a heavy, leather-bound family Bible. The gold leaf was tarnished, and the spine was cracked. When he opened it, he didn't find a family tree. He found a hollowed-out center. Inside was a single slip of paper. Not a note, but a map. It showed the coastline of Key Largo, with a specific point marked in red. Station 1864. Station 1864, Cass muttered to himself. That's not a plantation, that's a frequency. As he tucked the paper into his pocket, he heard the faint, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of a helicopter in the distance. In 1958, a private chopper in the Everglades meant one of two things: a billionaire or the CIA. Given the judge's connections, it was probably both. Cass slipped out of the room and headed for the estate's private library. He needed to know what Evelyn had found in those 1864 ledgers before the cleanup crew in the black sedan decided he had overstayed his welcome. The library was a dark, oak-paneled cavern. At the far end, behind a desk that looked like it was carved from a single petrified tree, sat Senator Vance. He was staring at a wall-sized map of the Caribbean, his face illuminated by the green glow of a desk lamp. "You're a persistent man, Thorne," Vance said without turning around. "But persistence in Florida usually leads to a shallow grave in the sawgrass." "I found a map, Senator. Station 1864. Your granddaughter, or rather, your niece by marriage, seemed very interested in it," Cass said, stepping into the light. "What happened in 1864 that's so important to the current Republican campaign?" Vance turned, a cold, practiced smile on his lips. In 1864, the Sterling family didn't just run cotton. They ran intelligence for the Confederacy. They had a series of signal stations from Richmond to Havana. One of those stations, Station 1864, was never officially decommissioned. It became a blind spot in the national record. Vance stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the encroaching swamp. The Janus Group realized that if you can control a signal that officially doesn't exist, you can move money, weapons, and men across borders without a single prying eye from the Treasury. Evelyn found the original contracts. She found out that the Sterling Trust isn't just a fortune. It's a black budget clearinghouse for a shadow war on the Cuban horizon. "And you let her find this?" Cass asked. his hand drifting toward the .38 in his shoulder holster. I didn't let her do anything. Evelyn is a Sterling. She has her grandfather's blood and her grandmother's curiosity. She didn't just find the contracts, she found the red ledger, the one that lists the names of every prominent businessman in the South who is currently bankrolling the covert operations in Havana. Names that would destroy the party if they ever saw the light of day. Suddenly, the library doors burst open. The two men from the black sedan, clad in identical gray suits, stepped in. They didn't have badges. They had suppressed pistols. "The senator is finished with his briefing, Mr. Thorne," one of them rasped. "We'll take the map now." Cass didn't wait for a formal invitation. He kicked over a heavy mahogany side table, using it as a shield as the first silenced rounds thudded into the wood. He dove through the library's French doors, the glass shattering in a spectacular spray of crystal. He hit the wet grass of the terrace and sprinted toward the tree line. Behind him, the cypress estate was no longer a home. It was a hornet's nest. Searchlights from the incoming helicopter swept the grounds, turning the Spanish moss into skeletal fingers. Cass plunged into the swamp. The water was waist-deep, freezing, and smelled of ancient decay. He could hear the dogs barking now, bloodhounds, the traditional choice of the Sterling family for hunting fugitives. "You want the 1864 ledger?" Cass whispered to the dark water as he ducked beneath a tangled mangrove root. "Then you're going to have to follow me into the deep end." The Southern hospitality was officially over. The Janus group was no longer whispering. They were screaming. And Cass Thorne was the only one left who knew that the gilded swamp was about to overflow. There is a silence in the Florida Keys that feels older than the continent itself. It's a humid, heavy stillness where the only things moving are the tide and the predators. As Cass Thorne steered a stolen skiff through the labyrinthine, no-name channels toward Station 1864, he realized that the Janus group hadn't just co-opted the Sterling family's history, they had weaponized it. The past in Florida isn't buried. It's just submerged, waiting for the right frequency to bring it back to the surface. The moon was a sliver of bone in a charcoal sky. Ahead, rising from the black mirror of the water, stood the station, a crumbling, octagonal tower of coral stone and rusted iron. Originally a lighthouse for Confederate blockade runners, it now looked like a jagged tooth rot in the mouth of the bay. But the modern antennas bristling from its summit told a different story. This was the nerve center of a shadow empire. Cass killed the engine and drifted into the shadow of the mangroves. The smell of salt and rotting vegetation was overwhelming. He climbed the iron ladder of the tower, his .38 held tight against his chest. Inside, the tower was a jarring mix of the 19th and 20th centuries. Ancient stone walls were lined with state-of-the-art radio equipment, the vacuum tubes glowing with a sinister orange hum. In the center of the room, sitting on a crate marked Property of Sterling Sugar, was Evelyn Sterling. She wasn't the trembling debutante the newspapers described. She was holding a heavy bolt-action rifle, her eyes sharp and cold, the red ledger clutched in her lap. "You're Thorne," she said, her voice steady. "My grandfather said you were the only one in the state with enough of a conscience to be dangerous. Did he send you to save me, or to retrieve the book?" "He sent me to find you, Evelyn. The senator sent the men in gray suits to find the book," Cass replied, stepping into the dim light. "They're 10 minutes behind me." "Then we don't have much time." She stood up, opening the ledger. "Look at the dates, Thorne. This isn't just about Cuba. The Janus Group has been using the Sterling shipping lane since the 40s to move surplus Nazi scientists and gold from Europe through the Florida ports. My grandfather wasn't just a businessman. He was the logistics officer for the birth of the deep state. This book, it's the blueprint of how they bought the Republican Party. Suddenly, the night erupted. A powerful spotlight cut through the dark, illuminating the tower's windows. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the senator's helicopter was deafening now. From the water below, 3 high-speed rum runner boats surged toward the tower, their engines roaring like angry beasts. "Give us the girl and the book, Thorne!" Senator Vance's voice boomed over a megaphone from the air. "The swamp has enough room for 2 more." "We're not giving them anything," Evelyn hissed, chambering around. The tower shook as the first bursts of machine gun fire tore through the coral stone. Cass dived behind a rack of radio equipment, sparks flying as the vacuum tubes exploded. "The basement, Evelyn! There's a subsurface dock!" Cass roared over the noise. They scrambled down a spiral staircase into the bowels of the tower. Below the waterline, a small, experimental submersible, the kind used for covert insertions, sat in a hidden pen. "You know how to pilot this thing?" Cass asked, shoving the red ledger into a waterproof casing. "My grandfather taught me everything," Evelyn replied, her jaw set, "including how to disappear." As they boarded the sub, the heavy steel door of the tower was blown off its hinges. The men in gray suits flooded the chamber, their suppressed weapons spitting fire. Cass fired back, his last 3 rounds catching the lead agent in the shoulder, but the numbers were against them. "Tide's out, Thorne," the agent screamed. "There's nowhere to go." "Then we'll take the scenic route." Cass slammed the hatch shut. The sub dived just as a grenade detonated on the dock above, the shockwave rattling the tiny vessel. In the green, murky depths of the Florida Bay, Cass looked at Evelyn. She was staring at the red ledger. "If we leak this, the Sterling name is dead," she whispered. "The name is already dead, Evelyn," Cass replied, looking at the sonar screen as the senator's boat circled above like sharks. "We're just the ones tasked with burying the body." The official report stated that a private research vessel suffered a catastrophic engine failure off Key Largo. No bodies were recovered. Senator Vance went on to win his re-election in a landslide, his campaign funded by unnamed private donors. But 3 months later, an anonymous package arrived at the offices of the Washington Post. Inside was a charred, leather-bound ledger and a small, gold-plated Sterling family crest. The story didn't break immediately. The Janus Group has long fingers. No semina byli passeini. Cass Thorne and Evelyn Sterling were never seen in Florida again. Some say they're in South America. Others say they're at the bottom of the Everglades. But whenever the wind blows through the magnolias and the swamp starts to hum with a certain frequency, the old money of Palm Beach looks toward the water and shudders. Because the red ledger is still out there, and the swamp never forgets a debt.